The young alcoholics next door thought they could terrorize a quiet 65-year-old woman with their all-night parties and loud music. What they didn't know was that I'm a retired banker with 40 years of experience in strategic planning, and I was about to wage the most methodical, devastating noise war they'd ever experienced. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Have you experienced something like this? Please let me know in the comments. My name is Caitlin Clark. I'm 65 years old, and I live in Princeton, New Jersey. And this is the story of how I turned 4 obnoxious party animals into my personal entertainment project while teaching them that age and wisdom will always triumph over youth and stupidity. I've lived in my beautiful colonial house on Elm Street for 12 years. After retiring from First National Bank, where I spent 4 decades climbing from teller to senior vice president, I finally had the peaceful life I'd always dreamed of. My days were filled with oil painting in my sunlit studio, reading classic literature in my garden, and maintaining the pristine white aesthetic that defined both my home and my wardrobe. At 65, I was still fit and active, swimming laps every morning and tending to my award-winning rose garden. The house next door had been owned by an elderly professor who kept immaculate gardens and never made a sound louder than his classical music on Sunday afternoons. When he passed away last spring, I was genuinely sad to lose such a considerate neighbor. Then the Hendersons moved in. Actually, moved in is too generous. They invaded like a plague of locusts. There were 4 of them: Jake, Tyler, Madison, and Bree. All in their early 20s, all apparently allergic to employment, and all seemingly convinced that the entire neighborhood existed solely for their entertainment. Jake appeared to be the ringleader, tall, scraggly, with the kind of patchy beard that screams, "I peaked in high school." Tyler was his loyal sidekick, shorter and stockier, with arms covered in tattoos that looked like they'd been done in someone's basement. Madison and Bree were their on-again, off-again girlfriends who seemed to communicate exclusively through screaming matches and broken bottles. The noise started on their first weekend. Friday night, 11 p.m. Bass-heavy music began thudding through the walls of my bedroom, making my antique china rattle on the shelves. I put in earplugs and tried to sleep, assuming it was just a moving-in celebration that would end soon. It didn't end until 4 a.m. Saturday night, same thing, but louder. This time they'd moved the party to their backyard, directly under my bedroom window. Drunken screaming, breaking bottles, and music so loud I could feel it in my chest. When I looked out my window at 2 a.m., I saw Jake urinating on the fence that separated our properties. Sunday night, the pattern continued. Apparently, these children had never heard of jobs, responsibilities, or basic human decency. By Monday morning, after 3 nights of zero sleep, I was exhausted, furious, and ready for action. I put on my favorite white linen dress, fixed my silver-red hair in a neat bun, and marched next door to have what I hoped would be a reasonable conversation. Jake answered the door in boxer shorts and a stained t-shirt, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. The smell of stale beer and marijuana wafted out behind him. "Hi," I said with my most professional banker smile. "I'm Caitlin Clark from next door. I wanted to introduce myself and talk about the noise levels." Jake squinted at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Noise?" "Yes, the music and parties. They've been going quite late, and I'm having trouble sleeping." "Oh," he scratched his stomach and seemed to consider this profound revelation. "Yeah, we like to have fun." "I understand that, but perhaps you could keep it down after 10 p.m. I'm an early riser and—" "Lady," Jake interrupted, "we're young. We party. That's what young people do. Maybe you should get some better earplugs or something." Behind him, I could see Tyler and the girls lounging on furniture that looked like it had been rescued from a dumpster. Empty beer cans and pizza boxes covered every surface. "I see," I said, maintaining my smile. "Well, I hope we can work something out." Jake shrugged. "We'll try to keep it down, but no promises. We paid rent, so we can do what we want." He closed the door in my face. Standing on their front porch, surrounded by overflowing trash cans and dead plants, I made a decision that would change everything. These children wanted to play games? Perfect. I'd spent 40 years outmaneuvering some of the sharpest financial minds in New Jersey. 4 drunk 20-somethings would be child's play. That afternoon, I began my research. First, I looked up the property records online. The house was indeed a rental, owned by a company called Garden State Properties. A few more clicks revealed that Garden State was a subsidiary of a larger real estate investment firm, and that firm's CEO was someone I'd actually worked with during a commercial loan negotiation 15 years earlier. I made a phone call. Robert Stevenson's office, this is Patricia. Patricia, this is Caitlin Clark from First National Bank. Is Robert available? Oh my goodness, Caitlin, how are you? Robert will be so excited to hear from you. 30 minutes later, I'd caught up with Robert, explained my situation, and learned some very interesting information about the Henderson lease. Apparently, they were month-to-month tenants with a very specific clause about noise complaints and neighborhood disturbances. 3 verified complaints would result in immediate eviction. Caitlin, Robert said, if these kids are causing problems, document everything. We've had issues with this property before, and we're not interested in losing good neighbors over bad tenants. I'll definitely keep that in mind, Robert. Thank you. Next, I researched New Jersey noise ordinances. The state had very specific laws about residential noise levels, with particular restrictions after 10 p.m. I also discovered that Princeton Township had its own additional regulations about unreasonable noise that could result in fines ranging from $500 to $2,000 per violation. Then I got creative. I spent the next week documenting everything. I bought a professional-grade decibel meter and began taking readings every time the noise started. I photographed the trash they left in their yard, the beer bottles they threw over the fence into my garden, and the damage Jake had done to our shared fence while urinating on it. But I also began phase 1 of my campaign, strategic inconvenience. The Hendersons, I learned through careful observation, were creatures of habit. They slept until noon every day, ordered takeout constantly, and relied heavily on various delivery services. Their mailbox was stuffed with unpaid bills, suggesting they were perpetually behind on everything. I started small. I called their internet provider and reported suspicious activity from their address. Nothing illegal, just enough to trigger a security review that would temporarily suspend their service while they verified the account. Since they clearly spent most of their waking hours online or streaming music, this was like cutting off their oxygen supply. Next, I contacted the pizza place they ordered from nightly. As a former bank executive, I knew the owner through various business connections. I mentioned that someone at that address had been making harassing phone calls to elderly people in the neighborhood, and perhaps they should be cautious about deliveries there. Within days, their favorite pizza place had blacklisted their address. I also happened to mention to the mail carrier, a lovely woman named Susan who I'd known for years, that the people at that address had been receiving some suspicious packages and acting strangely. Nothing illegal, of course, just enough to ensure that their mail delivery became much more sporadic. But the real genius was in the timing. See, while I was disrupting their daily conveniences, I was also preparing for phase 2, sleep warfare. I learned their schedule through careful observation. They typically started their parties around 9 p.m. and went until 3 or 4 a.m. Then they slept until noon, hungover and groggy. Their vulnerable time was between 6 a.m. and noon, when they were in their deepest, most fragile sleep. That's when I struck. At exactly 6 a.m. every morning, I began my new exercise routine. This involved moving my exercise equipment, a treadmill, stationary bike, and various weights, to the room that shared a wall with their house. For an hour each morning, I would engage in the most energetic, rhythmic workout imaginable, complete with music from my own powerful sound system. But I was just getting started. At 7 a.m., I would begin my household maintenance. This included rearranging furniture, hammering picture frames into walls, and using my power drill for various home improvement projects. All perfectly legal activities that any homeowner might do during reasonable daylight hours. At 8 a.m., I would start my lawn care. I invested in the loudest, most powerful leaf blower available, and I began maintaining my yard with the dedication of a professional landscaper. Every morning, for hours. At 9 a.m., I would test my home security system, which included very loud alarms that I would set off accidentally before quickly disabling them. The beauty of this schedule was its perfect legality. Everything I was doing was not only legal, but actually beneficial to my property. I was just being a very enthusiastic homeowner who happened to be most productive during the early morning hours. The first week of my campaign, I could hear them banging on the walls and shouting complaints. By the second week, Jake was pounding on my door every morning, looking like death warmed over. "Lady, what the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed when I answered the door in my pristine white workout clothes. "It's 7 in the morning!" "Oh my," I said with genuine concern. "I'm so sorry if I disturbed you. I had no idea you were sleeping at this hour. Most people are up by now." "We work nights." "Oh, what do you do?" Jake paused, clearly realizing he'd painted himself into a corner since none of them actually worked. We're musicians." "How wonderful! I love music. What instrument do you play?" It's complicated." "Well, I certainly don't want to interfere with your artistic pursuits. I'll try to keep my morning routine a bit quieter." Of course, I didn't actually change anything. If anything, I got more creative. I discovered that their bedroom windows faced my backyard, so I decided to take up bird watching. This required me to attract as many birds as possible to my yard, which I did by installing multiple bird feeders and playing recordings of bird songs to encourage more visitors. Hundreds of birds began gathering in my yard each morning, creating a natural symphony of chirps, tweets, and calls that started at dawn and continued for hours. I also began hosting morning garden parties for my book club. 8 very talkative women in their 60s and 70s who were delighted to gather in my backyard at 8 a.m. every Saturday for coffee, pastries, and spirited discussions about literature. We were quite animated in our discussions, particularly when debating the finer points of Victorian novels. The Hendersons tried to retaliate, of course. They made their music even louder, extended their parties later into the night, and began leaving trash in my yard. Jake actually threw a beer bottle through one of my windows. That was a mistake. I documented everything, photographed the damage, and called both the police and my insurance company. Jake was cited for vandalism and destruction of property. More importantly, this gave me the first official complaint I needed for Robert Stevenson. But rather than escalate immediately, I decided to get psychological. I began leaving small gifts on their doorstep. Nothing expensive or threatening, just little tokens of neighborly concern. A basket of fresh vegetables from my garden with a note, "Hope you're getting enough nutrition." A book about conflict resolution. "Thought this might help us communicate better." A package of earplugs. "Since you mentioned I should use these, I thought you might benefit from them too." The gifts clearly unnerved them. Jake started checking his car for damage every morning. Tyler began looking over his shoulder constantly. The girls started arguing with each other about who was jinxing them. Meanwhile, I escalated my morning routine. I bought a rooster. Now, you might think this was illegal in a suburban neighborhood, but Princeton Township actually had no specific ordinance against roosters, only against keeping more than 6 chickens per household. My rooster, whom I named Beethoven, was technically legal. He was also magnificently loud and had an internal clock that went off precisely at 5:30 a.m. every morning. Beethoven's morning concert became the opening act for my daily routine. Rooster call at 5:30, followed by my workout at 6, furniture rearranging at 7, lawn work at 8, and bird symphony throughout. The Hendersons were now getting roughly 2 hours of sleep per night. During the day, I could see them stumbling around their house like zombies, bumping into walls, falling asleep standing up. That's when I implemented Phase 3, social pressure. I began volunteering information about my colorful neighbors to everyone in the community. During my weekly visits to the farmer's market, I would mention to vendors how challenging it was to have such energetic young neighbors. At the library, I would discuss with the librarians how difficult it was to concentrate on reading with all the noise next door. At church, I would ask for prayers for patience in dealing with difficult neighbors. Princeton is a small, tight-knit community where reputation matters. Within weeks, the Hendersons had become the neighborhood pariahs without even realizing it. Shop owners began treating them with suspicion. Other neighbors started avoiding them. The local police began driving by their house more frequently just to check on things. But the masterpiece of my campaign was the dinner party. I decided to host an elegant dinner party for 12 of Princeton's most influential residents: the mayor, the police chief, several town council members, prominent business owners, and the president of the neighborhood association. I scheduled it for a Saturday evening when I knew the Hendersons would be at their loudest. I sent beautiful handwritten invitations on my finest stationery, requesting the pleasure of their company for an evening of fine dining and community discussion at my home. The night of the party, I outdid myself. My house was immaculate, my garden was perfect, and I wore my most elegant white silk dress. I hired a professional catering service and had the dining room set with my finest china and crystal. At exactly 8 p.m., as my guests arrived, the Hendersons began their nightly festivities. By 9 p.m., as we were enjoying the main course, the bass-heavy music was rattling the windows. By 10 p.m., as we moved to the garden for coffee and dessert, the screaming and bottle breaking had reached peak volume. I didn't mention the noise, I didn't complain or apologize. I simply let my guests experience it firsthand while we tried to have a civilized conversation about community development and municipal planning. The effect was electric. The mayor's face grew darker with each passing minute. The police chief began taking notes on his phone. The neighborhood association president started making calls. "Caitlin," the mayor said as the party was ending, "I had no idea you were dealing with this level of disturbance. This is completely unacceptable." "Oh, it's fine," I said graciously. "Young people will be young people. I'm sure they'll grow out of it eventually." "This isn't about young people having fun," the police chief interjected. "This is about public nuisance and quality of life violations. We'll be addressing this immediately." Monday morning, the Hendersons received their first official citation from Princeton Township, $1,500 for noise violations. They also received a visit from code enforcement about the condition of their property and their trash management, and they received a formal warning from Garden State Properties about lease violations. But I wasn't done. That same week, I learned through my research that Jake had an outstanding warrant for unpaid traffic tickets in a neighboring county. A simple anonymous tip to the local police resulted in his arrest Wednesday morning as he stumbled out to check his mail. Tyler, it turned out, was on probation for a previous drug conviction and wasn't supposed to be living with anyone who had alcohol or drug-related offenses. Since Jake had been arrested for DUI twice in the past 3 years, Tyler's presence in the house was a probation violation. Another anonymous tip resulted in Tyler being taken back to court and ultimately sent to complete his original sentence. Madison and Bree, now alone and facing eviction proceedings, tried to continue the party lifestyle, but without their male enablers, they mostly just fought with each other. The final straw came when one of their screaming matches turned physical and resulted in police being called for a domestic disturbance. 3 official complaints. Immediate eviction. By November, exactly 6 months after the Hendersons had moved in, the house next door was empty again. Garden State Properties had evicted them, kept their security deposit, and was now being much more careful about tenant screening. But the story doesn't end there. I learned through Robert Stevenson that the Hendersons had to pay substantial fines and court costs totaling over $8,000. Jake's arrest had cost him a potential job opportunity. Tyler was back in county jail. Madison and Bree had both been forced to move back in with their parents in different states. More satisfying than their punishment was the restoration of my peaceful neighborhood. My new neighbors turned out to be a lovely retired couple from Philadelphia who appreciated quiet evenings and well-maintained gardens. They even complimented me on my roses. But the greatest victory was personal. I had proven to myself that retirement didn't mean becoming a victim. I had used 4 decades of strategic thinking, community connections, and professional planning to systematically dismantle a threat to my quality of life. The Hendersons had thought they could intimidate me because I was older, because I was alone, because I looked like an easy target in my white dresses and carefully maintained appearance. They mistook elegance for weakness, age for vulnerability. They learned that some battles aren't won through volume or aggression. They're won through patience, intelligence, and understanding the system better than your opponent. 6 months after the Hendersons' eviction, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Jake, standing on my doorstep looking considerably more sober and substantially more humble than the last time I'd seen him. "Mrs. Clark," he said, "I wanted to apologize." I invited him in for coffee, curious about what had prompted this visit. "I've been in therapy," he explained as we sat in my pristine living room. "Court-ordered after the arrest, and I've been thinking about what happened here." Oh. I realize now that we were horrible neighbors. We were selfish and inconsiderate, and we made your life miserable. "You were young," I said diplomatically. "That's not an excuse. And honestly, I wanted to ask you something." "What's that?" "How did you do it? I mean, we went from thinking we were untouchable to losing everything in like 3 months. It was like you pressed a button and our whole world fell apart." I smiled and poured him more coffee. "Jake, I spent 40 years in banking. I learned that most problems can be solved with careful planning, attention to detail, and understanding how systems work. You and your friends created a problem. I simply solved it." "But it was so thorough. Like everything went wrong at once." "Nothing went wrong, Jake. Consequences simply caught up with choices. You chose to break noise ordinances, so you received citations. You chose to ignore your responsibilities, so you faced legal ramifications. You chose to be inconsiderate neighbors, so you lost your home." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I guess I never thought about it that way." Most people don't. They think actions exist in isolation, that there won't be consequences for their behavior. But everything is connected, Jake. Every choice creates ripples. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Really sorry, for all of it." "I appreciate that. What are you doing now?" "I got a job. Construction. It's hard work, but it's honest. And I'm living with my parents until I can afford my own place. A place where I'll be a good neighbor." That sounds like a very mature approach. After Jake left, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea and reflected on the entire experience. I realized that what I'd done wasn't really about revenge. It was about restoration, restoring peace to my home, respect for community standards, and dignity to my daily life. The Hendersons had tried to steal something from me, my right to peaceful enjoyment of my own property. In defending that right, I had discovered reserves of strength and creativity I didn't know I still possessed. Now, at 67, I'm living my best life. My mornings are peaceful again, filled with swimming, reading, and painting. My garden is thriving. Beethoven still greets each dawn with enthusiasm, and my book club still meets in the backyard every Saturday morning, though now we can actually hear each other discuss literature. I learned that age isn't a weakness to be exploited. Experience isn't irrelevant in a young person's world. And sometimes the most effective warfare is conducted not with volume and aggression, but with intelligence, patience, and a deep understanding of how the world actually works. The young alcoholics next door thought they could terrorize a quiet 65-year-old woman. They discovered that underestimating a retired banker with 4 decades of strategic experience was the biggest mistake of their lives. And I discovered that retirement doesn't mean retreat. Sometimes it means finally having the time and wisdom to fight battles exactly the way they should be fought, methodically, thoroughly, and with absolute precision. That's the end of my story. Have you ever had to deal with nightmare neighbors? Share your experience in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. I share stories like this every day, because sometimes the most satisfying victories come from the most unexpected sources.